Imagine someone who built their entire confidence on the assumption that you'd never leave. Someone who believed your patience was infinite, your forgiveness automatic, and your loyalty guaranteed. Now imagine the moment they finally notice you're not trying anymore. That moment hits them harder than any truth they've ever avoided, because this is where the entire system they built around controlling you starts to malfunction, and they can feel it like a power outage in their own universe. If you've ever reached that point where you stop trying because you finally realized your peace matters, drop a done in the comments. Someone out there needs to see they're not alone. The narcissist operates under a simple yet dangerous assumption that people will continue to give them attention, validation, and effort indefinitely. Their relationships are transactional, but they are convinced the transactions are one-sided, where they are always in control. From the beginning, they measure your loyalty, patience, and energy, assuming that your willingness to bend, forgive, or accommodate will never end. They rarely stop to consider that someone could reach a point where they no longer wish to participate in this cycle. And this is precisely why the moment you stop trying hits them like a shockwave. The narcissist expects resistance, negotiation, excuses, apologies, and compromises. They are conditioned to predict that you will continue to engage in the patterns they set. They see your efforts as predictable fuel for their ego, believing that no matter how toxic or draining the relationship becomes, you will continue to provide the emotional energy they need to feel powerful. This expectation of infinite effort is deeply ingrained in their mindset, which makes it nearly impossible for them to anticipate a sudden detachment. When you stop trying, you break the fundamental assumption that has governed the dynamic from the start. The narcissist experiences this like a malfunction in their internal code. It is disorienting because everything they have relied upon for stability and control suddenly disappears. The reactions they anticipate, pleading, guilt, defensiveness, never arrive, and they are left scrambling to comprehend why the system is failing. They may initially assume that your withdrawal is temporary, that you are exhausted and will return, but as the silence persists, panic begins to set in. Every tactic they use to maintain control, manipulation, gaslighting, triangulation, suddenly loses its effectiveness because it requires your engagement to succeed. Your decision to stop trying becomes an invisible wall, a boundary they cannot penetrate with their usual arsenal of psychological tools. This moment is not dramatic or noisy. Often it is quiet, calm, and deliberate, which makes it even more terrifying for them because it demonstrates a form of strength they cannot imitate. They are confronted with the reality that their perceived power was never inherent. It depended entirely on your participation. And now that participation has ended, the narcissist is forced to face their own vulnerability for the first time, realizing that their influence over you was conditional, fragile, and entirely external. They did not anticipate this, and they are unprepared to respond effectively because everything they know about control has been dismantled. This unpredicted scenario challenges their worldview, shakes their sense of superiority, and creates a profound internal discomfort. The sudden absence of your effort becomes a mirror showing them the illusion of their power, revealing the truth they have worked so hard to hide from themselves and the world. A narcissist's power is not rooted in any genuine authority or respect. It is entirely dependent on the emotional energy they extract from others, and they thrive on the belief that you will continually feed that energy. The moment your emotional investment ends, their carefully constructed sense of control begins to crumble in ways they cannot predict or contain. They rely on your engagement to maintain the illusion of dominance, using charm, intimidation, manipulation, or guilt to keep you locked into patterns that benefit them. When you stop responding, stop explaining, stop bending over backward to accommodate their whims, the foundation of their influence starts to erode because it was never real in the first place. It was contingent, conditional, and entirely dependent on your participation. Your detachment strips them of the feedback loops they depend on. They no longer receive the reactions that validate their superiority, fuel their ego, and reinforce their belief that they are in command. This collapse is not gradual, it is immediate and disorienting because narcissists do not consider the possibility of someone disengaging intentionally. They are used to resistance that is temporary, to moments of pushback that can be corrected, controlled, or overridden, and they are utterly unprepared for the quiet, firm, and final withdrawal of effort. When you stop caring about their approval, when you stop attempting to fix or manage their behavior, they are left exposed to their own vulnerabilities. Their tactics, gaslighting, triangulation, silent treatment, threats require a response to function. Without your emotional participation, these tools fail to produce the expected outcomes, leaving them frustrated, confused, and increasingly desperate. The narcissist begins to panic because the universe they believed was under their control is now chaotic, unpredictable, and reflects back to them the one truth they fear most: that their influence is entirely illusory and can vanish in an instant. Every strategy they relied on to dominate the dynamic is suddenly impotent, and they are forced to confront the reality that control is a two-way street. They never truly navigated. The collapse of control is not just external, it shakes them internally because it forces them to reckon with their dependency on others for validation, attention, and compliance. Your decision to withdraw emotionally highlights the fragility of their constructed reality and undermines the narrative they have maintained about themselves as untouchable, unshakable, and superior. In this vacuum, they may attempt last-ditch maneuvers to regain influence, but these are often reactive, clumsy, and transparent, revealing the depth of their reliance on your participation. The absence of your emotional energy becomes the single most destabilizing factor in their existence, and this moment, your deliberate detachment, is when the narcissist truly realizes that without your involvement, their control collapses completely, and everything they assumed about power, influence, and dominance turns out to be a carefully maintained illusion. A narcissist is conditioned to react to noise, chaos, and emotional drama because that is what validates their sense of power and control. So when confrontation occurs, when arguments flare or defenses rise, they feel alive in the exchange. They can manipulate, redirect, and assert dominance, and the conflict itself reinforces their belief that they are in command. Yet silence, deliberate, calm, and unresponsive silence, bypasses all of their familiar mechanisms and strikes them in a way confrontation never can. Silence is a mirror that reflects back to them their own inadequacy because it is impossible to manipulate someone who refuses to engage. When you stop arguing, stop defending, stop explaining yourself, and simply withdraw your emotional energy, they are left with nothing to react to. And this absence is terrifying because it is unfamiliar and uncontrollable. Their ego, which has been fed on reactions, outrage, attention, and compliance, suddenly finds no source of nourishment, and this lack creates a psychic void that is profoundly uncomfortable. The narcissist may initially assume that silence is temporary, that exhaustion, distraction, or confusion explains your detachment, but as the quiet stretches on, their confidence begins to crumble. Every second of unbroken composure, every refusal to respond to provocation, acts like a hammer against the foundation of their self-perception. Silence is a language they cannot speak, a territory they cannot navigate, because they have built their existence on the assumption that someone will always respond. This unresponsiveness forces them to confront the reality that control was never theirs. It depended entirely on someone else's willingness to engage, to justify, to explain, to appease, to react. The narcissist begins to experience an escalating internal panic, testing, probing, or attempting minor manipulations to break through the barrier of quiet. But often these attempts fail because the silence is intentional, consistent, and rooted in clarity. In this space, the narcissist realizes that their normal arsenal, verbal attacks, gaslighting, guilt, charm, or feigned vulnerability, cannot penetrate the shield you have erected simply by refusing to participate in their drama. Silence becomes a form of power, a demonstration of autonomy they cannot influence or control, and this realization can be more damaging than any confrontation because it strips them of the narrative they use to maintain superiority. Every attempt to provoke or manipulate that meets only quietness exposes their dependence on others for validation, and the longer the silence persists, the more their internal ego shakes, revealing insecurities they work tirelessly to hide. Unlike confrontation, which can be fought, argued with, or twisted into a display of strength, silence is absolute and immune to their tactics, leaving them powerless in a way confrontation never could. And it is in this vacuum of unreturned attention that the narcissist feels their true weakness most acutely, realizing for the first time that the absence of reaction is infinitely more destabilizing than any clash of words or anger. A narcissist's sense of identity is intricately tied to the attention and emotional energy they extract from others, and this dependence is often invisible to them until someone chooses to step away. They operate under the illusion that they are self-sufficient, powerful, and untouchable. But in reality, their entire confidence, control, and sense of superiority are maintained by the reactions they elicit from those around them. When you detach, when you stop giving them the emotional engagement they rely upon, it becomes painfully clear how much of their stability depends on your presence. This is not something they usually recognize because they are so focused on maintaining the facade of dominance that they rarely examine the source of their perceived strength. Detachment works like a spotlight revealing the structural weakness beneath a seemingly unshakable edifice. The narcissist sees that their influence, charisma, and manipulation only function when others participate. Every attempt they make to provoke, guilt, or charm you exposes how reliant they are on your responses, your calm, your refusal to engage in their expected patterns, and your intentional withdrawal are like a diagnostic tool highlighting exactly how fragile their ego is without external validation. The very fact that they are unsettled, uncomfortable, or panicked in response to your detachment confirms the truth they work so hard to deny, that they cannot operate independently of the energy they siphon from others, For them, this is terrifying because it undermines the core narrative they have built about themselves as competent, powerful, and superior. Every ignored text, every unreturned call, every refusal to engage acts as a mirror showing them their dependency. It becomes a silent revelation. They are not the untouchable figure they believe themselves to be. Their world is held together not by skill, strength, or moral authority, but by the willingness of others to provide validation and attention. This realization can trigger a spectrum of responses, ranging from desperate attempts to regain engagement to subtle manipulations. But the underlying truth remains. They are dependent. Your detachment does not need to be loud, confrontational, or aggressive. It simply needs to exist. The very act of prioritizing your own peace and boundaries illuminates the imbalance in the relationship and makes them painfully aware that their perceived power is conditional and fragile. The more consistent and deliberate your detachment, the more undeniable this exposure becomes, and the narcissist cannot help but confront their reliance on your attention. It strips away the illusion of control, forcing them to see themselves as they truly are. Someone whose identity, influence, and sense of superiority exist only when fueled by the willingness of others to engage, respond, and validate. This moment of clarity for the narcissist is subtle yet seismic, revealing the hidden truth that your withdrawal has always had the power to destabilize their carefully constructed world in ways no argument, confrontation, or conflict ever could. A narcissist thrives on supply, the term often used to describe the attention, admiration, validation, or emotional energy they extract from others. And the moment that supply disappears, panic sets in like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. For so long, they have assumed that you will always be available, that your reactions, forgiveness, and energy are endless, and that no matter what they do, you will remain a reliable source of validation. The concept that someone could simply step away, stop responding, stop giving their time and emotion is unfathomable to them. They have built their entire sense of security on the predictability of your participation, and when that predictability vanishes, the illusion of control shatters almost instantly. Panic arises because they are confronted with the terrifying reality that they cannot generate the same sense of importance, satisfaction, or superiority internally. They need others to provide it externally, and now the supply has stopped. This absence destabilizes them because it interrupts the mechanisms they have relied on for so long to maintain their identity and dominance. Every silent moment, every lack of response, every unacknowledged attempt at manipulation serves as evidence that their power was never inherent, and that realization terrifies them. In the absence of supply, they may engage in frantic behaviors, sudden messages, attempts to provoke reactions, reminders of past connections, or subtle emotional manipulation designed to draw you back into their orbit. These behaviors are not grounded in care, concern, or genuine affection. They are desperate measures to reestablish the flow of energy that sustains their sense of self. Panic manifests as a mixture of confusion, anger, anxiety, and vulnerability because for the first time, they are forced to face the truth that their identity and influence are not autonomous. The absence of your emotional energy functions as a mirror, reflecting the fragility of everything they thought was stable. It is a unique kind of fear because it is invisible to everyone else. They cannot easily articulate it or seek reassurance from peers, as their power and image depend on the perception that they are in control. Internally, however, the vacuum left by the missing supply creates tension, disorientation, and an almost primal discomfort. They may replay interactions in their mind, analyze your behaviors obsessively, or attempt every known tactic to regain access. But none of these efforts succeed as long as your detachment remains consistent. The panic is amplified by the realization that your withdrawal is not temporary, that it is deliberate, and that it signals a shift in power dynamic that cannot be easily reversed. This is the moment when the narcissist begins to understand that they are no longer in command, that their influence is conditional, and that without your supply, their carefully constructed reality begins to crumble, exposing the hollow center of their ego and the dependence they have long denied. A narcissist operates on a system of learned behaviors, manipulations, and psychological tactics that are designed to elicit predictable responses, maintain control, and secure validation. For years, they refine these strategies: gaslighting, guilt tripping, triangulation, charm, subtle provocations, because each action has historically produced the outcomes they desire. They know how to push buttons, when to withdraw, and how to re-engage in ways that keep others within their orbit. Their entire understanding of relationships, power, and influence is built on the assumption that people will continue to respond, comply, and provide the emotional energy they seek. But when you stop trying, when you no longer react to their maneuvers, they encounter a reality they have never faced. Their tactics fail. Initially, they may be confused, replaying past interactions in their mind, questioning what has changed, and doubting their own understanding of the dynamic. They may attempt the usual repertoire of strategies: subtle flattery, sudden bursts of anger, emotional appeals, or feigned vulnerability, expecting the old patterns to resume, but the lack of response is disorienting and destabilizing. The realization that nothing works creates a profound internal disruption because their identity, power, and self-esteem are all contingent on the effectiveness of these tactics. They are confronted with the uncomfortable truth that their influence was never inherent. It depended entirely on the willingness of others to participate, and now that willingness is gone. This failure triggers a range of reactions, from frustration to panic, because the predictability they relied on for comfort and control has vanished. The narcissist may begin to escalate, testing boundaries more aggressively, attempting new strategies, or increasing the intensity of previous attempts, yet the absence of engagement exposes the fragility of their approach. Each failed attempt serves as a stark confirmation that their methods no longer command authority, respect, or attention. This is particularly devastating because it forces them to acknowledge their limitations, a concept they habitually deny and mask through manipulation and performance. They are used to control being automatic, effortless, and reliable, and the moment they recognize that their playbook no longer functions, it is a blow to their ego unlike any other. In that recognition, they face the uncomfortable reality that their power is conditional and external, not intrinsic, and that they cannot force compliance or affection where it no longer exists. Your consistency in detachment, your refusal to participate in old dynamics, and your commitment to personal boundaries highlight the ineffectiveness of every tactic they have ever used. For the narcissist, this is a transformative shock, a moment of acute vulnerability, and a confrontation with the undeniable truth that their influence has limits. And when those limits are reached, they are forced to reckon with the hollowness of their control and the dependence on others that they have long denied. It is in this moment, when their tactics no longer work, that the narcissist truly begins to understand the consequences of your disengagement, the power of your autonomy, and the fragility of their constructed dominance. For a narcissist, relationships, interactions, and connections are less about mutual respect and genuine connection, and more about control, influence, and the steady flow of validation they extract from others. Their sense of superiority and power is built on the assumption that they can shape, manipulate, and direct the emotional and behavioral responses of those around them. Every conversation, every interaction, and every reaction becomes a tool to maintain dominance, and they operate under the belief that no one can completely disengage from the gravitational pull they exert. But the moment you decide to walk away, to prioritize your peace, boundaries, and autonomy over their demands, you commit an act that they cannot control, cannot manipulate, and cannot reverse. Your departure is not just a loss of attention. It is the ultimate challenge to the very foundation of their identity and their illusion of power. They are confronted with the harsh reality that their influence was never intrinsic. It existed only as long as others were willing to provide it. And now that willingness has ended permanently, this recognition produces a cascade of internal reactions: confusion, denial, attempts to reclaim control, and sometimes desperation. They may replay interactions, analyze every decision you made, and attempt last-ditch efforts to regain influence, yet the decision to walk away is absolute. Unlike temporary silence, arguments, or negotiations, which can be twisted or manipulated, the act of leaving represents a boundary they cannot breach. It demonstrates conclusively that their power was contingent and fragile, and that you are no longer a participant in the dynamics they rely upon. Every tactic they have ever used, charm, manipulation, gaslighting, threats, or emotional appeals, fails because it requires engagement from the other party, and you have intentionally removed yourself from that equation. Your departure exposes the hollowness of their perceived authority, revealing the truth they have long denied. They are dependent on others to feel significant, relevant, and in control. The ultimate defeat is psychological, internal, and deeply destabilizing because it forces them to confront a vulnerability they rarely acknowledge. Unlike conflicts they can win through argument, charm, or coercion, this loss cannot be reversed through skill, cunning, or manipulation. It is absolute and undeniable. In this vacuum of failed control, they are forced to reckon with their limitations, the fragility of their ego, and the reality that your autonomy exists independently of their influence. Walking away does not require confrontation, drama, or elaborate displays of strength. It only requires consistency, clarity, and the courage to value yourself over their approval. And it is in this simple yet profound act that the narcissist experiences the ultimate defeat: the realization that they can no longer shape, manipulate, or dominate you, and that their influence over your life has ended forever. Your freedom, your detachment, and your choice to leave dismantle the illusion of control they have spent years building, leaving them powerless in a way nothing else could. And this is the moment where your agency becomes the defining factor. the irreversible statement, and the final victory in the dynamic they never expected you to claim. So, when the narcissist finally realizes that you're done trying, it's more than just a moment. It's a collapse of their carefully constructed universe. They are confronted with the truth they never wanted to see. Their control was never real, their power was always conditional, and their identity depended entirely on the participation of others. Your detachment exposes their reliance. Your silence shatters their expectations, and your refusal to engage dismantles the strategies they once used so effortlessly. They panic because their supply is gone. They test because they're desperate to reclaim it. And they ultimately face the stark reality that their tactics no longer work. Every failed attempt, every ignored provocation, every boundary you maintain is a reflection of the autonomy they cannot touch. And when you walk away, fully committed to your own peace and independence, you deliver their ultimate defeat, not through confrontation, anger, or chaos, but through clarity, consistency, and unshakable self-respect. This is the power of detachment, the inevitability of boundaries, and the undeniable truth. No amount of manipulation or charm can override a person who has chosen themselves. The narcissist may never fully understand it and they may never admit it, but in that moment, you have reclaimed what was always yours: control over your own life, energy, and destiny. That is not just freedom. It is the victory that echoes louder than any words, louder than any argument, louder than any attempt at influence. You are done trying, and in doing so, you have won completely.